Yep. There, thank you for reminding me to do that. So Jennifer Haupt, my very good friend, is really the architect of this anthology. And I was just telling the group that I'm sorry that I didn't do it. I think I was overwhelmed, but I'm so glad to be a part of spreading the word. So Jennifer, tell us a little bit about the anthology and where you got the idea for it. And then I'd love it if everybody talked a little bit about their essay.
Yeah, well, I just want to welcome, Sally Koslow and Jean Kwok and Meg Clayton. And I'm just thrilled to be here. And back when the pandemic started and we realized it wasn't going away and there was going to be no miracle, and my book deal was canceled, and so that miracle went away. And I was just like, let's just do something positive for booksellers who have supported us so much over the years. And I was really inspired by people like you, Anne, who with copies and all you guys have done with, raising money and awareness for literacy. And Jessica Keener is another big inspiration for me. She does a lot with raising money and awareness for different causes. And Garth Stein he's done a lot for Bink. And so this book just kind of came together really quickly because everyone wanted to support Bink, which is the book industry charitable foundation, which supports independent booksellers in financial need. So yeah, it's become, I think that's really a community project. And that to me is the best part of it.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you can bring a large number of voices together to add a microphone to something like this, which is something that we're all experiencing, this piece of being together in this time of the virus, but also very alone while trying to deal with our own individual problems. So John, did you contribute to the anthology? Did you write a story?
Yeah, I contributed. Well, I did the intro, and then I contributed a poem that I wrote. It's called Why Get Out of Bed? And I wrote it a while ago, and I kind of rejiggered it for the pandemic. And, because there were many mornings I was like, seriously, why bother? And it's about hearing voices in the hall, hearing my family, hearing my husband getting breakfast and my son in the shower. And, it's, I think the joys of daily life really have to kind of move us on. And I think all the contributors, I'm looking at you guys, and it's like, I think that was an inspiration for all of your essays. And so maybe we can start by, you can tell us a little bit about that. And starting with Sally, with New York City being your inspiration. I just loved that.
Well, thanks, Jen. First of all, thanks, Anne, for having all of us today. I'm a former Poppy myself, so I'm very connected to Anne for a long time now.
For a long time.
Yeah. And thanks, Jen, for inviting me to contribute, because it's an honor to be with the three of you and everyone, the other 87 writers who contributed. I thought a lot about what I wanted to say about COVID, and then I realized that my answer was right out my window, which was what it was like to be in New York City, because at the time we were writing this, it was March, April, May, that time. And New York at the time was the epicenter, and it was incredibly grim. I live about a mile away from several different hospitals, and about every 5 minutes you would hear a siren from an ambulance whiz by. And that was just about the only noise you would hear in New York. You would hear, I could hear church bells though, which I never had heard before, even though I'm sure that they've been ringing every hour on the hour for years, because they were drowned out by the ambient noise of cars and trucks and buses and honking and car alarms and everything else that had gone dead quiet in New York. So I wrote about what it was like to experience COVID in the epicenter, and why I wanted to move here to begin with, because I'm not a native New Yorker. I grew up in North Dakota, actually, and I went to school in Wisconsin. And when it was this senior year, yes, Wisconsin, I thought of where I wanted to move. I considered Washington, D.C., because I had interned there the previous summer, and I thought about Kansas City because there was an opportunity to go work at Hallmark and write doggerel for cards. And I thought about Minneapolis, which was a lovely city and probably where my parents pictured me when I graduated from college. But I really wanted to be in the city because I always wanted to join the staff of the magazine. And now we have hardly any magazines, unfortunately, but at the time there were zillions, and New York was the place to be. So I moved to New York, and I've always loved being in New York. And so my essay was a big wet kiss about New York. And there's one thing I would rewrite if I were to do that essay now, because at the end of the essay, I closed it out by saying, but I'm not going to go on the subway till there's a vaccine. And in fact, that has proved to be untrue. I have probably been on the subway about 10 times now, and the subway's been terrific so far. I used to tune in every day at about 1:45 before, when our governor, Andrew Cuomo, would lead the way on television. And he did a great job, I thought, in New York in terms of leadership and getting people to wear masks and in imposing the seriousness on all of us and everyone. You would think that it would be impossible in a city like New York for people to respond in a cohesive way, but that did not prove to be the case. And now our numbers are really, really low. We got other problems like with school starting, which seems to be kind of a fluid date. But in any event, I did reflect on, it's called my piece, Postcard from the Epicenter. And it was an image of what it was like at the height of the first wave of COVID, and let's hope there's not a second wave. And really, it's very different now. I would say it's about 65% back to normal. The gyms just opened, although no classes, darn it, because I love my Pilates classes. And the libraries are sort of open. There are lots of wonderful outdoor restaurants. And really, New York feels very lively and quite terrific right now.
What I love is the fierceness of all of these essays in different ways when I think about it, because you were your fierce love of New York. And for Meg, a real fierceness with talking about, the non-celebration of your son's graduation ceremony. And tell us about that.
Yeah, well, so my piece started as a conversation with my agent, actually. My oldest son got his PhD this year, and after 6 years of really hard work in one of the country's top programs, he ended up defending his PhD virtually instead of, at his school, by the time you get to defense, it's pro forma, and your mentors bring champagne and you celebrate together. And so he did that virtually instead and graduated virtually from an apartment all by himself in Cambridge, where he literally didn't see anybody but his doorman for a long time. And so that's where it came from. I was telling my agent that that's what I was going through, and she said, you need to write about that. And I said, I can't write about that. There's so many people suffering so much more. I know my friend Meg Wolitzer lost her father to COVID. So, it's hard to say, I'm crying in the shower because I don't get to go to my son's graduation. It just seemed like, not very much. And Marley Rusoff, my agent, said, what you were saying is what everybody is going through in some way. And she thought it would be healing for people to write about the things that we're all missing. And so that's where the piece came from. It came immediately from my son's loss of the applause that he works, it's not what he worked for, but it's something we all wanted to give him. And my niece had a baby, and so we met the baby by Zoom at our Easter Zoom. And my nephew was planning to get married, and now that's been postponed because we can't all get together to celebrate it. And so though it's It addresses the loss of those little moments of celebration, and but also, you know, the ways that we do the best we can, I suppose. So for my son's graduation, it was going to be my dad, who, you know, his entire life has been waiting for some, you know, some of his heirs to get a PhD from this particular university, and it was going to be he and I and my husband and my younger son at the graduation. And so instead, because it was a virtual graduation, well, anybody could come to most of it. So my brother joined us from Berlin, and my niece from Berlin, and my best friend from New Hampshire, and my dad and mom were both there, even though my mom, you know, can't travel. And so there were, you know, upsides to it. And so it's just a piece about embracing what we can and making sure that we honor the moments in whatever way we can. So that's what it is.
And Jean, your essay I love because it speaks to that same thing with honoring the small moments and just, you know, pure joy. I mean, there's a certain fierceness, I think, in just really allowing ourselves to experience the joy of small moments. And so tell us a little bit about your essay.
Well, I mean, I think my essay is in the end ultimately about joy, but it's also about what it's like to, you know, be cooped up in a pandemic with someone who's like a really terrible cook, you know, that would be me. So, you know, I think on one level, it's about, you know, being trapped in the house with, you're seeing people like cooking these elaborate Thanksgiving dinners. I mean, I am, you know, making cookies that are miraculously both like raw and charred at the same time. I mean, because I'm really special that way. So, and in a pandemic, let me tell you, you can't hide the way you normally can because they're all looking in the garbage. You know, normally like I'd be like, toss, 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 you know, we do go through a lot of bread, you know, because of my skills with the toaster. So, you know, I'd be like, stick it in the garbage. And then, you know, my kid is like, he's standing right next to me because he's always standing next to me nowadays. And he looks and he's like, well, I guess, you know, Papa won't get too fat. So, you know, on one level, my essay is about that. But on another level, it's also about expectations. And expectations that we have for ourselves, expectations that society has for us, expectations that, you know, your mother has for you, and not fulfilling those. And the fact that it is actually, you know, kind of confrontational, especially in a pandemic, because, you know, the restaurants are gone. Like, it's no takeout, there's no running, you're all in there together, everybody's there. The food comes from your hands in the kitchen. And I mean, and, you know, because I actually come from a really working class background. We had been a fairly wealthy family in China, but I'm a first generation immigrant. And so in the essay, I also talk about how we moved to the US. We were incredibly poor. We lived in New York City in an apartment that was unheated. It didn't have a working heating system. And it was overrun with roaches and rats. And we started, you know, I worked in a factory for most of my childhood in Chinatown, in Manhattan's Chinatown. So that's the, you know, background I come from. And one of the problems was that, not the poverty, but that there are certain expectations that go along with being my mother's daughter. And I like miserably failed to meet them in every way because I was pretty much born to be a writer. So I was like dreamy and clumsy and bad at gym and, you know, like in my own world half the time. So I just was not good at all the things my mother told me to be good at. And then when you jump forward to this pandemic, I thought, you know, actually my mother was right about a lot of stuff. Like, I actually should have learned how to cook rice properly because that would be a very helpful thing nowadays. But, you know, the other thing I realized, of course, was that, or that coming from my background is that I feel like I'm so privileged, you know, to have my space, to have a job still. I mean, as much as authors ever have a job, you know, but to be with the people I love and to be able to see people online, you know, to have a laptop, to have an iPad, to have those basic things. And we've actually been having a really good time. I mean, my husband does all of the cleaning in the house because I can't do that either. So, but he's even worse in the kitchen than I am. So I do the cooking. But, you know, we laugh about it. And I love to dance. That's something I learned to do later in life. And that's really important to me. And the rest of my family, I mean, I live in the Netherlands. I married a Dutch guy. Not a dancing country. I mean, wonderful country, happiest people in the world, not a dancing country. So my kids have like inherited, I would say, my husband's dancing genes, you know, more or less. But we have like a great time, like dancing together, just, you know, to the Wii U and stuff like that. And so I think a part of what my essay was talking about was, you know, accepting yourself, finding grace in your imperfections, enjoying being together for what you are. And like Meg said, you know, very much just being grateful for what we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. I mean, I think that, you know, just talking a little bit about how many different ways the virus affects everyone is, it's one of the most interesting things because we all come at it from a different place. All of us are living it in a different way, I think. I was sort of reacting to your cooking story because I haven't really been cooking that much. And then all of a sudden the virus came and I realized that I was burning myself like all the time because I'd forgotten that you can't put your hand on your stove and you can't touch your lid on the pot. And because it was my daughters had left and I was living alone and I wasn't cooking as much. And all of a sudden I had all these injuries. So, you know, and I was thinking, Meg, when you were talking, that the thing to remember is that our grief and our pain, you know, it's never relative, right? So we get to experience whatever it is we are feeling, and all of those feelings are valid, whether someone has it worse off or not. And I love actually that lesson seems to be happening every day in the pandemic, that we always feel guilty if we aren't the worst ones suffering.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I mean, I have to say that we've had many medical issues, so we've done our fair share of suffering. And so, you know, one part of me thinks, it's all relative, but those losses are real losses, and
real losses.
And it's okay to acknowledge that's a loss, and it's kind of healing to acknowledge, you know, what's going on. So
yeah, I don't think it's healthy at all to make those losses relative. Right. I don't think that's how we actually function as humans. I think we all sort of recognize that there are different ways that we're experiencing that.
Yeah. Another just important thing is, you know, there's some people who ask me, like, if the book is depressing, you know, because it's all these essays and poems and interviews about the pandemic. And what really struck me is that nearly every piece, there's grief, there's joy, there's comfort, there's all the different pieces flowing through these poems and essays and interviews. And, you know, that's kind of how life is right now. And I think we've really come to it's exhausting in some ways, right? All of it. But it's also, in a way, it accentuates our humanness, I think, to allow ourselves to feel all of it, to feel the grief, and then to feel the happiness of dancing, or, you know, the sadness of loss of a small moment, and the fierceness of I'm not leaving my city, you know, and it's all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wisdom in it too. I would actually like to very quickly share a short one stanza from a poem that Jamie Ford contributed called Same, because when I read it, I thought, oh, this is just exactly how I feel when I write. And I thought it was just so wise. He says, I'm lucky though, I get paid twice a year to stay inside and break my own heart. I sprinkle glitter on the jagged pieces and hand them out to strangers seeking their approval. And I just read that and I thought, oh, like, Jamie, that's exactly how I feel when I'm writing, and it's so lovely. And I think the book is full of bits like that that are that for me help me understand my own heart and my own life in a way that's really uplifting in a weird sort of way. So I think it's
I
great.
also think that as writers, we inherently social distant. Just this is our life to begin with. It wasn't a big shock for me to be in the house more because that's where I work.
Yeah.
It was much harder. It has been much harder, I think, for my husband to adjust. My husband is in a field that hasn't bounced back at all. He's in commercial real estate for New York City, and nobody knows what to do. You know, should they expand their space because they have to socially distance their employees, or should they contract their space because more people are happily working at home? And also there's the reality that many people are fleeing cities like New York and Chicago and LA, and houses that were languishing on the market for, suburban houses that were languishing on the market for 2 years are suddenly being snapped up overnight. There's a lot of unknowing about this.
Yeah.
But I think that we writers have had it probably, the easiest, although of course there's the randomness of the illness itself. And as you point out, like Meg Wolitzer lost, and Helma Wolitzer lost their father and husband. And there's just a complete randomness about who gets the disease.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think you're absolutely right, Sally, about, how it is as a writer, especially as a fiction writer. I mean, I spend my days with my imaginary friend.
Head.
Right? And, we don't even have to wear masks when we're together because we're all pretend. So, from a daily standpoint, it's not really different in a way. And yet there's this overhang that is that takes up so much psychological space. When you go out for a walk, you have to wear a mask and make sure you stay away from people, and you can't visit with your friends, you can't, all those normal bits of life. I find as a writer that I used to get up every morning and sit down and write. It's the discipline that came from starting to write when I had young children, and I had to grab every moment that I could get. Now I find, it's like my old dog. I have to circle 3 times before I can settle down to actually write. And just finding the psychological space to write is a much bigger challenge than it used to be, just because of the...
And to read, I really can't even begin to count the number of people who've said to me, I just don't have the normal concentration I have to stick with a book. And I don't know where that's coming from. I guess just this enormous ball of anxiety, within everyone. I know in my case, I have children who live in Los Angeles, and I can't figure out how to visit them.
Yeah.
It's been since last Thanksgiving that I've seen my son, his wife, and their little children. And I don't like to think about my life standing still. I think that it's that inertia that is, through no fault of our own, grabbing all of us, that I think frustrates people deeply, because this is going to last for a long time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting.
I think
authors it's been easier for them to write, and for some authors it's been really difficult for them to write. And I'm just wondering how everyone's writing life has changed. I mean, including yours, Anne. I know you were finishing up a novel, and have things changed for you creatively?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was struggling to do anything but write for a while. And luckily I was in a really good space because I was in the editing phase of writing the book. And so over COVID, I finished it. And because you have those deadlines, I think it was a little bit easier for me to keep moving and to write it. So, but I will say I couldn't do anything else. I couldn't do anything else. Like I had a lot of trouble running the Tall Poppies, I must say. I had a terrible time running the Poppies. All marketing just felt disrespectful. We have a race war going on. We have all of these authors who lost their abilities to do traveling to promote their books. I really struggled to find a place where it felt like it was important to tweet anything. And, you know, I'm a humorous writer. Every joke felt disrespectful. So I struggled a lot in that regard. And I just put my head down and forced myself to continuously work a little bit every day. And then I would absolutely stop, give my profession. Because I think the other thing about this is that, like, for the first time ever, I'm like home all day, not doing anything but that. I retired from my professorship just before all of this hit. And so this is the first time in my life where I actually was not writing in the creases and of everything, right? So I was writing like at 5 a.m. and then writing at 9 p.m. and writing in between classes and things like that. So it was the first time that I was able to leave my professorship and to write full time. So all of a sudden now I had all this time and I felt incredible guilt for not using every bit of it to write. So I had to like walk back my urgency and learn how to schedule and then break and schedule and break without feeling sort of a wreck. So between those two things, that was tough. My daughter and I were quarantining together. Thank God. Because otherwise, I really think I would have gone a little crazy. So I think it certainly affected me in a lot of ways, but I think it was a little bit different because I had a deadline, so I was sort of forced to keep moving. My head has not always been in the game, for sure.
I know Jean also has a deadline, as do I, and it's, you know, it's a real blessing, isn't it? I mean, to have to do something because it's, you know, it just gets you to sit down.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, although I think that, you know, what everyone has been saying about writers being most ideally suited to this because it is very similar to our real lives, it's true. But I also think the circumstances are different. I mean, and do make it hard in a lot of ways. But I do know that before the pandemic, I have this friend who's this very kind of social, lovely, charming woman. And she said to me once, she said, you know, if I had your life, I'd have to kill myself. You know? She said, if I have to think about locking myself away for ages and ages to write a book and, you know, finish it by myself and just send it out into the world, she said, I would just slit my wrist, like right now. And so I do think that for us writers, it's easier to transition than a lot of people who may be more social or better adjusted than we are. But on the other hand, you know, the other issues, of course, the tremendous stress and fear that's all around us. And I so identify with, you know, stepping back from social media, because I have as well, partly because of my book deadline, but partly because there's just so much to say that you feel like you can't say anything anymore. I mean, you just can't, you cannot adequately comment on society because it's just so overwhelming what's happened in this past year. And the other issue I have is that, you know, I've been home with like a husband and 2 kids. So it's like, you know, and then, you know, I'm sitting there and I have my deadline and I'm trying to work. And my kid, who's, you know, I have a 13-year-old, is like, hey, Mom, look at this otter video, you know, and then there's like a cat and an otter, you know, and then my husband comes, he's like, oh, look, this thing just blew up, you know. I just really, it's like, I know nobody understands I have a real job, but I actually have a real job. You know what I mean? Like, leave me alone to actually can work. But there is this idea, of course, that writers don't really work and that you're just home drinking coffee the whole day. But then when you need to get that, you know, you have that deadline, it can be kind of stressful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you're talking about stepping back from social media, because I, you know, at first was like, I can't do social media and I really can't engage in any of the political stuff, but I'm finding real comfort in scrolling through pictures of people's cats. Your cat, I love, is so cute, and dogs in their gardens, you know, and what's blooming and what they're making for dinner, where usually I'm like, really, you're posting about what you're cooking for dinner? I'm not interested in that. But so I've totally like done sort of this weird shift with social media where I feel like it helps me feel less alone, honestly. Mm-hmm. And I feel like as writers, you know, doing all these Zoom conversations, it makes me feel better. And I think it makes readers feel better too. It's like, you know, they can communicate with us. So there's so many opportunities for that. You don't have to go, you know, to wherever, to New York or wherever, to see authors, or to even to your bookstore. You can just go to Facebook. So I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
I agree with that. And I also think it's really nice because I mean, we're all speaking from our homes, right?
Yeah.
And so you get a little glimpse into people's lives. And that's really lovely. I think there's some people who are doing an extraordinary job with that. Like, you know, the NPR host Scott Simon, he started doing with his family every evening a little thing they streams onto Twitter. And, you know, you show up, if you're his guest, you show up on his phone and he literally holds his phone up, you know, so that everybody can see it. And you just chat with him, and you know, you see his dog and you see his wife and his kids, and his, you know, his daughter makes the graphics, and it's so personal. And I think there are a lot of people who are just kind of inviting people into their lives in a way that we haven't done before, in part because we're all alone together, you know. So that can be, I actually find social media a lifeline in some ways. And I'll tell you, my husband had quit Facebook right before this all happened, for the reasons that people do. But now he's like, you know, he's only got me. So he's like, you're working all the time. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
I look upon Facebook, Instagram, and sometimes Twitter sort of as a magazine. And I page through it in the same way I would enjoy a magazine. There's some beautiful visuals, you know, people, I find when I put up a lot of pretty pictures of New York, and people seem to really like them. And I love it when people actually give you a link to an article that they cared enough about to post, because that's something that I might want to page through. I would otherwise not see.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's been a wonderful resource. And I think Bloom has been really brilliant, because people get together and exchange ideas about books. And there are some readers out there, fortunately.
There are, and we kind of call ourselves the happiest place on the internet, because we really don't allow anything other than happiness on our site. You know, really, we want to connect with the readers, and we want them to get to know us. And so it has been a very nice, positive place where you can always come and something sort of interesting is going on, as far as interesting for us, right? Reading and books and things like that. It's our passion. So it's nice to have a place to kind of show up for.
Well, it gives a connection. You know, books offer such a connection,
Mm-hmm.
and pillars are really the pillars of kind of creating that community. And librarians too. Libraries are just, you know, another sort of big pillar in that community. So I really like that, you know, in terms of this lovely monster, it's brought together readers and writers and bookstores and booksellers and librarians. Tonight we're doing a big library event with a library in Cleveland. And it's just going to be, it's just really nice to feel that sort of connection among all of us.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I did a piece for The Moth just earlier this year. This was like right when it was starting to happen. And because I have this, so, you know, writing was my like third career, but when I first started my careers, I started as a nurse. And when I was a nurse, we were dealing with the AIDS epidemic. Mm-hmm. And so I was, you know, in the hospital before we were using gloves. I mean, we had HIV patients coming in and we didn't know what they were dying from. And then they gave us these plastic gloves to wear that were porous. And I remember washing my hands and going, you know, I could swear that my hands are getting wet. And then they realized that we needed to wear, do you have to go, Sally?
I do, I have to go. I'm so sorry. I'm not in New York. I happen to be elsewhere celebrating a big birthday of my sister-in-law. We surprised her yesterday. So I wanted to say goodbye and thank you for the chance to do this.
Thanks so much for being here, Sally. It's so good to see you.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, and then they said, you know, it's sort of like the same thing that I've been seeing with the COVID, you know, then they said, well, you have to wear latex masks or latex gloves. And then there were huge surge of building of latex things. And I remember talking to my mother about it. My mother was a nurse. and she had the polio epidemic before her. And so we had long conversations about how different it was between these epidemics. And then my mother's mother was in the middle of the Spanish flu. So we each of us have had this very large presence in all of the epidemics or pandemics that's happened over the years. And my daughter is a nurse in Minneapolis at the ICU in COVID times. So each of us have had this really strong connection with what this is like to be in the center of it, trying to take care of people before we know anything about it. And often people will say to me, you know, what, you must be so worried. And now we just found out that my daughter does have COVID. And I always say that, you know, worry is kind of a waste of time. I'm not a worrier. I think worry is what you do when you can't do anything else, when you feel powerless and there's nothing else you can do. You spend your time worrying. But in fact, we are kind of doers in my family. And all we can do is sort of take care of each other and take care of. And that's the piece I think that has been the clearest cut for me, that this is a time when we can really care for each other in whatever ways we can. And that's really all we can do.
Well,
and
I think power is really important.
It's the power. That's our power. That's what we take back. Agreed.
Exactly. And I have a really great interview with Danny Shapiro in the book about balancing self-care and care for others, and how that really creates a sense of not just community, but a sense of powerfulness.
Right.
And I think even before the pandemic, and then with the murder of George Floyd and so many other things, people have been feeling very powerless.
Yes.
Just because of the health issues, but because of everything that the fear mongering in the world. And so I think, you know, doing even small things, for example, writing postcards. There's a program to write postcards to voters and tell them how to vote. And just small things like that can really help.
This anthology, this anthology that you guys put together is a way of exercising your power to bring people together. And that's what, you know, instead of worrying, you guys wrote it, you put it together, you edited it, and you got it out there. Like, it's a miracle. And you did it in such a short
quickly, unbelievably quickly. I mean, you were so fast.
I know. That's what I mean. It happened so fast.
And I think Jen has done just an incredible job pulling everything together for this anthology. I mean, she got us all to write and to contribute. She put it all together. Then she did the publicity. I mean, all of the, you know, behind the scenes publishing stuff as well to get, you know, the whole team. I mean, everyone is donating all of the efforts so that all of the profits go to the indie booksellers who need it. But you know, the blurb she got from like Patterson and from amazing people, I just couldn't believe. And the reviews that have been coming out, like in the Washington Post, about the book, I think it's. I was like, Jen, will you be my publicist? Like, how did all this happen?
I know it. It's amazing.
The only way it happens is because I have this community of, Jean is out there, and Meg, and you too, Anne, and people on you know, just promoting the heck out of this thing. And I've heard from so many readers that they have really, reading these stories helps them to feel more powerful too, you know, getting back to the whole issue of taking control of our lives.
Yes.
So that makes me feel just really good. And every time I read a review, there's a big, you know, story in the Seattle Times this morning, and it mentions, these reviews always mention the pieces of various different authors. So it's really a cool thing because, you know, as we all know, when you publish a book of your own, there's like, you're glad when good things happen, but you're also a little bit like, oh, you know, yay me, and that's, you know, there can be too much of that, right?
Yeah.
With this, it's like, I get all this love for all these, you know, 90 authors coming, and it's so cool to be able to share that with people and to share it with readers. I mean, readers are just such a big part of the success of this book.
Yeah.
On the first day, it's already went into its second printing.
I saw. That's so exciting.
And so, and you know, my publisher said that Amazon had totally underestimated the number of people who were going to order the book. And I feel like that's a sort of power too. It's like, it's like this sort of movement. We're going to make this thing happen, and Amazon's helping us raise money for independent booksellers. And, how about that?
I know, it's so great. It's such a fantastic thing that you've done. And I think what you've done is taken a chance for everybody to have a megaphone in a way that we don't usually get. It's great. Yeah.
I think something that's great about the book is also that for people who maybe can't concentrate right now on really, something that's, bigger or thicker, you can do it in pieces. You can just kind of browse through it and find what you feel like and what you feel like you need right now at that moment, and then put it down and then pick it up again later.
For people who are having those concentration things.
And it's also available on audiobooks, so you can hear it, that's, I think, one of the real, I've been listening to audiobooks for decades now, and it's such a joy just to sit back and be read to. And the readers of these are just really great readers, so it's a really nice audiobook.
Narrators are incredible. Really incredible. I love the audiobook.
That's great.
Every audiobook, sometimes the narrators really aren't perfect. And this one, they just, Podium just went and got the best. So it's really.
You guys, it's so amazing. I just love it so much. Is there more that people would like to say, or is there's some questions from the group? Because I have my phone and I can read questions if there are questions from our watchers. It's a little bit of a delay on my phone, it looks like.
Yeah, I don't dare go to Facebook and see, what comments are happening, but I'm curious, I love answering reader questions.
Yeah, so if anybody has any questions. Is there anything else that you guys might like to say while we wait for any questions to come in?
One question I saw on Bloom this morning was about the cover.
Oh, yeah.
That came to be. And so I just wanted to give a shout out, actually a huge shout out to my publisher, Michelle Pat. I told her I had this vision of just people in their apartments connecting through books in different ways during the pandemic. And she came up with this graphics, and I just think it's just perfect.
It's fantastic.
It really shows the spirit of the book. And and just that the book came out so quickly is really because of my publisher too. I came to her, this is like the beauty of a small publisher, is I came to her and I was like, I have this idea for an anthology. Do you think this is crazy? And she's like, no, I'll contribute my time. And she went to the book, to IPG, the distributor, and they donated their time. They didn't take a cut. And then, places like Publishers Weekly gave us free ads. So it's really been this industry-wide just support system for the book. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to, all the behind the scenes people who made it happen too.
That's a great ad. I think people really do want to know where that cover came from. And the fact that you're having so much support just really shows there is this community in the book world and the reader world that we're all so passionate about story. Let's see if I have anything here from, no, people just really are happy that they have something to do during lunch.
I come from California, it's still breakfast time here.
Oh, I guess. Oh, sure. Yeah. Is there anything else you might like to add?
Well, I actually have a question for, we were just talking about how kind of, brilliantly Jen has helped put this book out there in the middle of the pandemic. I want to ask Meg about this as well, because didn't you just have your paperback release, Meg? Or
I did,
yeah. So what was that like? Was that totally in the middle of the pandemic?
My book came out in, my novel, The Last Train to London, came out, the paperback came out in June. There was talk about moving it, but, we had so many nice things lined up that it seemed a shame to move. So we had the Indie, July Indie Next for the independent bookstores, which turns out most of them weren't open, but oh well. But we also had the placement in a lot of the Walmarts and Targets and Costco's where people are still shopping. And so that was that, they just decided to go forward. It's an interesting time to have a book out. As you say, it's hard to, you feel like you should be doing stuff on social media, but you feel very self-conscious about it because you're like, look at me in my book. And I have to say, my book's about something that's very close to my heart and a very important moment in history. It's about the Kindertransport rescue of children from World War II.
Meg, show the cover.
Yeah.
Grab the book, hold it up so we can see it. It's right behind you. I can see it. Because it's a really beautiful book. So we know what we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's been interesting it's doing pretty well. But it's where it's doing well is in the places where people are shopping, places like Sam's Club and Costco and things like that. And so it's complicated. I know, Jean, yours, they put it off until next year. How is that?
Well, it's that, everything is kind of up in the air now because of the pandemic. So, I feel very fortunate that that's this book, Searching for Sylvie Lee. And I feel fortunate that the hardcover came out last year in 2019, June 2019. So I actually had the big launch. Then, there are authors, of course, who had the initial launch of the book now, right in this period. But my paperback release, as you know, is usually a year after the hardcover. So it should have been this summer. But yeah, my publisher actually did decide to move it to December 8th. So it's coming up soon. But yeah, I was wondering what your experience was like, because of course we will still be in the pandemic then, but hopefully, I hope we'll be seeing the end of the tunnel at that point. But we had a great tour lined up, and Meg and I were going to do an event together and all of this other stuff. But actually, I'm glad that at least I had the launch when things were still normal. I think it's really hard for authors who are trying to have their books be known in this time. Thank goodness people are home. They have time to read. I also know a lot of people who are reading more than ever. The thing is that they do tend to read more known quantities, like authors they've read in the past that they know already. So I think as a community, we always want to help the less known, the debut writers. And I think that's more important now than ever.
Yeah. Well, one thing also about, getting back to the book, I think there's a real balance of people who are well known. There's Jenna Bloom, there's Meg, and there's Jean and Jamie Ford and Pam Houston, Caroline Levitt, all these people who are very well known. And then there's also up and coming authors who have contributed just incredible pieces. I'm just looking at the front cover, of who contributed, and there's people like Amber Flame, and there's, January Gill O'Neill, there's Terry Elam. There's just people who I wouldn't necessarily have known, their work as much if I hadn't gone out and looked at, who's really doing some exciting things now.
What's nice for that is that it's like, come for Jean and Meg and stay for the others. It's like a warm-up band. And that, I think it's really a nice thing for the authors who are the up-and-comers, because they get to be spending time amid the same pages as the people that are bringing people into reading them. So it's with
the tall poppies in some ways too, where some people who are well known, and then you've got some people who you're bringing up. And I think it's really an important part of our community is, not just trying to be in the limelight. When I think about it, the people who try to be in the limelight, it doesn't work out. It only works out if you bring other people along with you.
It only does. And I'm not interested in really being in the limelight unless I have a whole bunch of people next to me, because it's just, I don't know, it's not my thing. But even though I'm an extrovert, for sure, like that's a little bit different for me, because I am kind of not the person that likes to stay home all the time, but I also don't necessarily want to be I don't like necessarily to talk about myself in that way. The one thing that Poppies, I created the Poppies for was, and this is kind of a good time to talk about it a little bit, is because, you know, we're talking a lot about how hard it is for women specifically to have their kids in home and still maintain their careers. And because they carry the largest load for the family typically, and then you add homeschooling on top of it, and now we're trying to get these people to write their books and live their lives and do other jobs. And so right now there's been an awful lot of articles about that I've read recently, which I think is fascinating, because the Poppies, the reason that I made the Poppies was I was so sick to death of women falling out of being able to publish because they were so wrapped up in the lives of their families in a good way, in a positive way, in the way that their families needed them. And because of that, their voices were being muted. They were falling out of the fray. And I just am so tired of women not getting their voices heard because they've chosen to, you know, bring their children up and spend time at home and make dinners, that I just thought this has got to stop. And so that's really where the Tall Poppies came from. And I think it's really sort of apropos right now because it's the worst time for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that the Tall Poppies group has always been such a great resource for writers. I mean, in fact, you know, when my book launched in hardcover, you guys supported me then. You know, I was featured and interviewed in the Bloom Tall Poppy Writers group. But I really hear what you're saying about how I think in some ways, you know, there are expectations for women, and perhaps there shouldn't be, but they're there. You know, that's just one of those things. Yeah, and you have to deal with having a career that is not easy to predict, where the road is not very clear cut, and where it seems like, you know, everyone thinks what a writer is doing is like lying on the beach with the laptop going like this, you know, while in real life you're like drunk and like smoking and, you know, lying on the floor in your pajamas and haven't showered in 5 days and you know, with a blank page in front of you. So, but I do think that that's something that's a real issue. And I have to say that one thing about the isolation of the pandemic is that it's really brought into the light all of these structures, you know, this community, these connections that we have. And it's shown us all that they're real. They're not things that we made up to, you know, make ourselves look good on social media. They are right there. People are donating, people are stepping up, people are sharing.
Right. You're right. That's a really good point, that it isn't something we made up, that there people really are helping each other, you know. Well, let me see. I don't think we had any questions, but let me just check really quick. I don't want to keep you too much longer. People are watching and they all love the cover.
I do think I want to make a plug for first time authors. I think this is an incredibly hard time to have a first novel out, or first book out, and try to make your way. So, you know, one of the things I've been doing is just a short interview. I've been trying to host debuts, especially on my Facebook page, to live stream. And I think, you know, those are the kinds of things that make us feel like a community and make us feel good. So if you're out there as a reader, you know, please think about, you know, when you're picking up the next Ann Patchett, also please think about, you know, picking up Jennifer Rosen, who has a beautiful novel called The Yellowbird Sings, or Francine Harris is a poet. Here is The Sweet Hand, a beautiful poet, less well known than you know, Mark Doty or somebody like that. So keep, you know, browse the shelves even in whatever way you can these days. It's really important for new voices, and that's one of the things that booksellers do for us. Hello, dog.
yeah. And if I could just do another quick plug, I mean, just in terms of, because this is a time where, you know, we might not be aware of it, but it is a really critical time for a lot of people in the arts, for a lot of writers, publishers, booksellers, indie bookstores. You know, I think if you have an author that you care about and want to support in any way, one of the best things you can do is pre-order their book. So, you know, obviously if the book is available, order it. You know, if you want to read it, order it. That's a fantastic thing. Unless, of course, you don't have the means to do so, in which case, you know, do not feel bad or guilty about borrowing or sharing or anything. You know, that's, you know, we want to be read. That's why we write. But if, you know, you say, I really love this author, I really want to support them, you know, I really love this book. One of the best things you can do is to pre-order, because people outside the business don't realize so many decisions are made before the book ever hits the shelves. Like Jen was saying, you know, Amazon had completely, you know, not counted correctly how many pre-orders or how many orders they thought they would get for this anthology. And it becomes a kind of cyclical process, because if there are not enough pre-orders, then that book is going to be ordered in small amounts, and then nobody will know it exists because they'll go in the bookstore, it won't be there. Right. And then, you know, it's just kind of downhill all the way from there. Well, if there's a kind of strong support before, then the book can really take off and get attention that it might not have gotten otherwise.
I mean, that's what happened with this book for sure, is we got so much support from the industry, like I was saying, and also from readers, because readers were just like, you know, it's a combination of all the different authors that they love and the bookstores that they love. Everyone wanted to support their booksellers. And the pre-orders were incredible. I mean, Target ordered actually just huge amount of books, and which we were a little bit surprised, like happily surprised, Barnes and Noble. And so that creates a whole sort of thing. And it's true, every order counts. I mean, every order counts. So that's something small that, you know, actually something big that readers can do.
Yeah. Right. And tell your friends about books. I mean, that's something you do. You know, the most important way that people select books is by their friends telling them about them. So tell your friends. If you can't afford to buy books yourself, tell your librarian about a book you particularly want, because you know, they might not have ordered it, and if you're talking about it, that raises the visibility of it. So all those kinds of things. Yep. And for writers, keep writing. You know,
keep writing.
I have friends who say that they only write, their goal is to write one good sentence a day. And I just admire that so much, because I mean, honestly, I was really glad to have all these excellent essays and poems to, you know, to edit, because my writing has been like, and and you guys are so inspiring. I mean, Meg, that board you have behind you, the storyboard of your next novel is just so inspiring to me. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to get out my bulletin, just like in the basement, and I'm going to start putting up note cards. So,
that's my new. That one's actually magnetized. I think you can't really tell it from there. I usually use I got a. Let's see, I got a cork board. But I'm in a new house. I got a cork board like in my old house, and then I decided I would try a magnetic one, and I love the magnetic one. It's great, but I will tell you that I learned the hard way that you cannot point a fan at a magnetic cardboard. So like spots in the bottom are where the fan was.
Meg, are those Post-its, or how do they hang up?
No, they're little 3x5 cards. Let's see. Pulling out that won't fall.
Pull one out and read it. I just want to know what you're doing.
3x5 cards, and they say there's one for each chapter of the book. I write short chapters, and these are little square magnets that.
So you just poke it up there. Oh, I see. Okay. Wow.
So I put it up there. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, and the white cards are a beginning of a sequence, and then the different colors are different points of view. So it keeps me organized and allows me to see the entire novel at once. And because, you know, it's hard, you know, the first draft of this was almost 500 pages, so it's hard to hold it all in my little brain. So it helps me keep it organized.
So that's the book that you're working on. That's your next book?
This is my next book.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
I cannot.
Okay.
You know, I'm really superstitious. I'm really sorry. I had my 5th novel was The Race for Paris. Literally, I sold my 2nd novel, The Wednesday Sisters, to my team at Random House, which I loved. And they said, you know, what do you want to write next? And I said, I have this World War II story about the women journalists' liberation in Paris. And they're like, you got anything else? You know, and so it was only when I stopped saying that was going to be my next book that it finally became my next book. So it made me very sort of superstitious about talking about what my next book is. But it is a book that is very much in the vein of The Last Train to London, and it's due at HarperCollins on January 2nd, 21. So 1/2/21. So
Okay.
it's a palindrome, which makes me feel like it's a very auspicious and lovely date. So, but you have one, Jean, due even sooner. Is that right?
Yes, I have one that is due 5 October. So yes, it is. I can tell you a little bit about it, which is that it is. It begins with a woman. It's basically a letter from a woman begging someone she loves for forgiveness for her part in a murder. And as the story unravels, and like Searching for Sylvie Lee, it's a book that is on one level a thriller, a mystery, suspense. On another level is about race and immigration and identity and language and culture. And as the book progresses, we don't know who was killed, you know, who she's writing the book to, who she's asking for forgiveness, until, you know, we have our suspicions, but we don't really know all of that until the very end of the novel.
I want to
So,
read.
but oh well, thank
That's
you,
awesome.
thank you. But it's a book that is very. I mean, I have Meg and I, when we get together, we can talk crap like for hours, because we think about books the same way, even though it may seem like we write different types of books on the surface. The structure of our books, we're both very. Yeah, we just very much plan and think about it that way. So I use Scrivener, and I do print out, although I don't have a big thing like that, but I do most of it online. But this new book is really complex plot-wise for me. I mean, hopefully for the writer, it's just going to seem fun and effortless and thrilling. But for me, I'm like, oh, I've got so many balls in here. I've got so many balls. And at this point, I have so many balls in the air that I'm like thinking that I've like out clevered myself, you know, and that I should have just like been like, I'm just like, this is what happens, guys. All right, from the beginning to the end, this is what happens.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think we're kind of running out of time here. We've been here an hour. I could stay here and talk to you guys all day, honestly. All I'd need to do is have a little lunch while we chatted, but thank you so much for coming. I mean, I know that everybody was really looking forward to having you, and I certainly have enjoyed this conversation. So,
And thanks for hosting us. And Jennifer, thanks again for putting this together. Really just a brilliant collection.
oh,
Absolutely,
fantastic.
thank you.
Yeah. So take care, and I can't wait to read the essays.
Oh, good.
Everybody, hold up the book. Hold up the
Hold
book.
up the book. There you
Thank
go.
you, everyone. Bye. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.